Next on Images Imágenes, Latino journalists discuss the 1994 elections. Saludos, welcome to Images Imágenes. I'm Miguel Perez. It was a historic landslide for Republicans. Widespread rejection of Democratic incumbents. Some say it was a referendum against the Clinton administration. But what did the election of 1994 mean to the Latino community? Did we gain or lose ground in our quest for political empowerment? And what about the politicians who made immigrant bashing a part of their campaign? What is their effect on anti-Latino sentiments that seem to be flourishing throughout the country? How does California's anti-immigrant proposition 187, affect us here in New Jersey? Will there be more efforts here to implement similar measures? Those are just some of the questions we'll be attempting to answer with a panel of Latino journalists. Monica Rohr from the Philadelphia Inquirer, Yvette Mendez from the Newark Star-Ledger, and on the telephone from California, Rosalba Hernandez of the Orange County Register. Welcome to the show. It's wonderful to have you here again. We seem to be doing this quite often, reviewing with a panel of journalists the issues concerning our community, but we couldn't miss this opportunity because of this important election we just had and what it means to our community. There are a lot of things that we want to discuss in terms of how many Latinos were or weren't elected, but not just Latinos, the non-Latino politicians who were making Latinos a part of their campaign. As I said in the introduction, the Latino or immigrant bashing that went on, especially this year in 1994. And first of all, we should talk about what we gained or didn't gain in this election. It seems that we didn't gain much because we had to begin with 17 congressmen in Washington. We still have 17 congressmen. We didn't gain a seat. We didn't lose a seat. We have 14 Democrats and 3 Republicans. What does that mean? Are we stalling or not gaining any ground?
I think we got lucky in this election with all these Republicans coming in everywhere. I'm surprised that we did maintain the number. And here we do, our one congressman here, Robert Menendez, he won, but he wasn't really running against any formidable candidate.
Yeah, I think it's the one thing to be thankful for during this election. I mean, overall, the results are pretty bleak for the Latino and other minority communities. So it's the one thing we can be thankful for is that we didn't lose any seat. At least we just stayed where we were.
Especially when so many of them are Democrats and so many Democrats lost.
Right, right. Well, I'll be curious to see how many in the next, I know this is a few years away, but in the next congressional election, how many Hispanic Republicans will be running?
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Well, quite a few of them ran, in fact, this year, but they all lost. There were a lot of more Hispanic Republicans running this year than ever before. Rosalba Hernandez, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Did you have any Hispanic Republicans or Democrats running in California who won or lost? Could you tell us about them?
Well, you know, I'm sorry to say this, but I was heavily focused on Proposition 187 coverage and was not doing state races, so I'm not as knowledgeable about that. I'm sorry, I cannot provide you with all that information.
Well, I do have a list here in front of me, and if I get a chance, I'll go back and I'll let you know. Certainly, there were a lot of races in California, from what I see here in front of me, involving Latinos who ran. Most of them, unfortunately, lost. So again, as we said earlier, we did not gain any seats. But also, we lost in terms of chairmanships, because there were a couple of Latino congressmen who chaired some committees, and because the Republicans are taking over, we're losing that much power as far as chairing certain committees in Congress.
Yeah, well, it's not just the Latinos, it's all the Democrats.
That's correct.
They're just going to have to revamp the way that they're going to work with the Republicans on this. I think everybody's still working on those details. It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
And Rosalba, the reason why we have you on the program all the way from California is because we do want you to talk about Proposition 187. I think most of our audience is probably familiar with what it does. It limits access to schools and health services to the children and of course adults in terms of health services to the children of illegal aliens or illegal immigrants, as I like to call them. But you've been covering that. Bring us up to date. What has happened now in the courts? We know that the whole thing is stalled in the courts.
Right. As a matter of fact, today is a very important day for Proposition 187, what it will mean to California. In Los Angeles, there is a federal court hearing that will be underway at 1 p.m. our time to determine whether or not to put a full kind of stop order on the implementation of 187, all parts of it. There is another stop order that was approved in San Francisco in another federal court there last week on the education aspect. This one, though, in Los Angeles addresses all aspects of 187 and whether or not they can be implemented or in to what degree and in what parts. At the moment, Governor Wilson has also instructed all state agencies to begin drafting emergency legislation to begin the implementation of 187 for their own departments. So that would be health, that would be social services, schools, of course. So it remains to be seen whether or not this federal court hearing today will determine whether or not any aspects of this will start as soon as at the end of business day today, tomorrow. Everybody's holding their breath out here. We've been this way since Tuesday.
So in spite of what's happening in the courts, Wilson is still moving forward with his plan to implement Proposition 187?
Yes, yes. He's instructed all his agencies to go ahead and start drafting legislation. Of course, all that has been halted by the judge's order, as of last Wednesday. So today's hearing is very crucial whether or not the next step goes into effect, which is that departments then start implementing rules for asking people questions, gathering the paperwork on this, where to send it. Really, all the agencies that we have talked to in California, hospitals, free clinics, social service programs, everyone is really confused as to what they do now, and I think today's hearing will go a long way to kind of clear up that confusion as to what next steps can be taken throughout the state.
Rosalba, and what is the mood of the Hispanic community in terms of protesting, demonstrating, showing their opposition still to 187?
Well, of course, it reached its peak in a few days before the election. I'm sure you captured across the country the student walkouts. They felt very passionately about what was happening to them. They were heavily criticized for those walkouts. A lot of people didn't understand why they were walking out, protesting that education might be taken away from them, and they were choosing to walk out during school hours. But as one very mature student pointed out to me, a Hispanic student pointed out to me, they were showing in a very graphic way, this is what California can expect if 300,000 students are kicked out of public schools. You will see children walking around with not much to do, basically.
I'm wondering if the Hispanic community had galvanized early enough to show their opposition to this. Do you think, Rosalba, that they waited too long?
Certainly that was a question that could be asked of all opponents, not just the Hispanic community. I think there was a strategy in place to downplay the entire issue until it really began picking up steam in just the last couple of months as people started focusing on elections. It had been a very quiet campaign on both sides. The Proposition 187 proponents really had very little money, very little hired guns, basically kind of touting their side. So it was very quiet, and I don't think the opposition wanted to draw a lot of free attention to it via the media, via any campaign posters, things like that.
Well, also
by really coming out strongly against it.
But Rosalba, also in terms of funding, from what I understand, from what we read out here, is that the people who were willing to fund the opposition did not come into it until very late, because that's when they realized that this thing was beatable.
Right, that is true. true. So again, in hindsight, we could all question at what point should we have done what? And I'm sure there's a lot of opponents right now, especially Taxpayers Against 187, which was a huge coalition fighting this. They had the California Medical Association, California Teachers Association, the Sheriffs and Police Associations, all with them. And certainly, yes, it was only in the last 2-3 months that you saw big money being spent. And I think the last figures were somewhere around 2 million or something, and they were expecting about 4 or 5. So whether or not that was a part of it, or whether or not it was an issue that just captured the imagination of California voters who voted for it, and they weren't going to listen to really logic or reasoning on the opponent's side,
Rosalva,
it remains to be seen.
Rosalva, I have a question. One of the things that struck me about 187 and other anti-immigrant legislation is that it kind of stirs up a whole bunch of anti-Latino, anti-Asian, anti-immigrant sentiment in general. Have you seen that? Has this kind of, the passage of it, given people free license to start discriminating against Latinos and immigrants in general? Is that starting to surface already?
Well, certainly around in the few days before the election, yes, we were hearing lots of reports of in businesses, hotels, you heard stories about staff arguing and physically even fighting with staff over it. It became such an emotional issue. Yes, we are hearing reports of people being questioned, by employers. Some people saying that they're being pulled over more by police. Whether or not this is all having to do with 187, of course, we can't concretely say, but many people are reporting to us, especially Latinos, who are a heavily part of the people affected here in Southern California out of 187. They are reporting a more fear factor out there. They are living in a daily fear that they're being questioned, that they will be kicked out of jobs. They can't make any plans for the future. It's really getting to people psychologically here.
And what about the effect this is having on the people who might be affected directly? Let's talk about those illegal immigrants who are possibly considering moving back to their home country, or are they considering moving to another state?
We have heard reports of some families, and of course this is among the more tragic situations. You have families where some children were born here, some children were born in Mexico, and those children are illegal. You have instances where wives or husbands are here legally through legal residency, but perhaps their spouses aren't. So they're having to undergo huge decisions right now. We know of some families who have sent their children back rather than having them arrested and perhaps the whole family put in danger. They're going through very, very emotional, crucial decisions right now. But again, I think a lot of people are still waiting. There's been a lot of public awareness campaigning on behalf of state agencies and immigrant rights groups, Latino activists here, to tell everybody nothing has been decided yet. Hold on, do not panic, lead your lives daily as you have been. That has been the big message for the past week, and it does seem to have held. But again, today's court hearing will go a long way to either fueling more panic or perhaps calming fears again.
You mentioned that some people are already sending their children back without waiting for a final outcome. We also hear that some people are refusing to get medical treatment or show up at a hospital already because they're afraid of repercussions. Is this happening, and what kind of damage will that do to the health of the community in terms of them having to rush to an emergency room without having some primary care to begin with?
That's right. So far, thankfully, we have not heard of any tragic cases of people of not going and seeking emergency medical care of some sort, or care that later on turns emergency medical care. We have heard reports of the day following the elections of a lot of people not showing up at prenatal clinics because, of course, prenatal care would be removed, whereas it is now allowed for undocumented immigrants. We have heard reports of people not going to regular doctor's appointments, that sort of thing. But again, the big campaign was to instruct these people to please attend appointments, do not give up any regularly scheduled appointments, go on about the business as usual. In the last few days, I think that has gotten across. I think people have kind of come back out of the closet and have started going back to their daily lives. But again, everything is focused on today. Today will be the big message.
The voters who who approved this referendum, they're going to say, we don't care, you know, if you don't want to go and get that medical treatment. But you know when they will care, when they have there's some infectious disease going around, and they're going to say, oh, wait a minute, we might have made a mistake. And I hope that this should be a lesson to, if all the other states are not taking a look at this and seeing the ramifications of what's going on, especially the Latinos in New Jersey, if we don't take a look at what's going on.
Well, what about the Latinos in California? How many Latinos voted for Proposition 187?
Well, we have studies, and certainly the Tomas Rivera Center and other think tanks who do research on Latino community trends. It showed that even though overwhelmingly Latinos were against 187, there was still perhaps a 25%, 15 to 25% contingency among the community that was undecided either before the election or said they were going to vote for it. And certainly that increases even more in other minority communities such as Asian groups, African Americans, and other minority groups.
And what's the explanation for that? Are they masochistic or what is it?
It has to do with background, a lot of it. And in the Asian community, you have a lot of groups here who were brought here legally as refugees. Consequently, they cannot relate to the experience of an undocumented immigrant and what they have to go through. You also have people, elderly Latinos, who came here through legal programs such as the Bracero program, or perhaps just through other legal residency means. And they find it difficult to recognize the fact that younger Latinos, families, are choosing to come illegally rather than going through the years-long waiting that they had to go through, perhaps. And there's a little bit of a resentment. I had to go through it. Why don't you want to go through it? You know, you're cheating. So there was that kind of schism in the community, and that's why some people voted for it.
Rosalba, thank you very much for being with us. We want to try to bring the issue home now and discuss here in New Jersey what it means to us, but we really appreciate all the background you've given us on Proposition 187. We wish you good luck, and we hope to have you on the program in person when you come to New Jersey soon.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Good luck. What does it mean for New Jersey? I mean, is there a potential that this will happen here?
Yeah, I think there's a potential it could spread around the country, not just in New Jersey. I guess what she was saying about the hearing today being crucial over there, I think it's crucial for everyone. Everyone's going to be looking at that.
The dean of the congressional delegation now, who is now Marge Ruckema, is very much for that type of proposition. She just voiced her support again just in the last few days. I definitely think it's something to be considered here. But if
Governor Whitman went to California and campaigned for Pete Wilson.
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and if she...
It's a very bad omen for us here.
There you go.
It doesn't look good. You know, in the last race, the Republicans captured 2 more seats, so 8 out of 13 seats in New Jersey are Republican. The state legislature is controlled by the Republicans. The governor is Republican.
Yeah.
If this doesn't happen here, I'll be shocked.
Well, you mentioned Marge Ruckema and the Hispanic Leadership Agenda group out of Washington, a coalition of national Hispanic groups, put together a sort of a report card for all the congressional members. And Marge Ruckema gets one of the worst scores in terms of voting against issues that would benefit Latinos. Out of 10 issues, she got 30%. So in other words, she voted for Latino issues 3 times out of 10. Among them, she's one of the sponsors of the U.S. English movement, or a law to pass enforce the English as the official language nationally. So we do have, as I said in a recent column, California's big brother, I was referring to Governor Pete Wilson, has younger siblings in New Jersey. And one of the ones that we definitely must talk about is the campaign that Mr. Martini conducted up in Passaic and Essex counties, where he made the welfare and the illegal alien issues part of his campaign. Tell me about what you thought about that, Yvette.
Yeah, he was doing what a lot of the Republicans were doing. They were running on a very conservative campaign. And he was running against a weak opponent, Herb Klein, who's been in office only 2 years. Nobody really knew very much about him. I covered his first campaign, and he really didn't stand out for anything. And you know, Martini's, in the one, I think you're referring to one advertisement where he used a picture of illegal aliens crossing the border. He said he defended his use of that picture by saying it was used, I believe, in Time magazine initially.
Well, what happened there, he also had radio commercials along the same theme. But what happened with that picture, as we found in the Bergen record, was that on one side, it was the Time magazine picture where you see all these aliens jumping over a fence, supposedly at the Mexican border. But on the other side of the same flyer, he appeared with factory workers in Passaic saying that these are the immigrants we should support who are hardworking and so forth. And then we went out and discovered who these people were, and we found one of them in particular who was very offended by the fact that he had been used in this flyer because he came to this country as an illegal immigrant and never took welfare, never depended on anyone, worked all his life, became a legal resident and eventually a citizen, and was planning to vote for Martini until he was used in the way.
But that's part of all the rhetoric involving the Proposition 187, and when people use the illegal immigration issue, and it's like a code word. They kind of, what's lost in the rhetoric is the reality that most people who come to this country, whether illegally or legally, come here to work. They don't come here to live off welfare. They don't come here to soak up our social services. They come here looking for work.
And they do want to learn English.
Right,
we should keep repeating that because they do want to learn English in spite of what they keep saying. Well, you know, if you will, us members of this, I'm not going to mention any group, but these members of this group or this other group or this other group, we all recognize that we had to learn English. So do Latinos. And eventually, the moment they get off the plane or the boat or whatever, that's the first thing they want to do.
But you know what? A lot of Latinos in that district, the 8th district, did come out and support Martini. There's about 87,000 in that district, and a lot of them said, hey, he's really on our side. And you know, we should stress that Hispanics are not one blob. We're all the same. We think alike. We look alike. Blah blah blah. We're all different, and that's the problem.
Monica, what happened in Philadelphia?
Well, in Philadelphia, I think it stayed the same. There wasn't really any change. What happened in Pennsylvania is kind of frightening because even though there's now a Republican governor in Pennsylvania, and for a while there was a Democratic majority in the Congress, but one of the key Democrats switched to Republican, so there's now a Republican majority in the legislature and a Republican governor.
Just like in the country.
Right, right. So that means we're not going to get a lot out of Pennsylvania as far as social services. You know, they're already talking about welfare reform, which is another code word. You know, when people talk about welfare reform, they usually talk about cutting programs that benefit poor people, mostly minorities.
And when you mention code word, you remind me that I wanted to mention there was a study released recently, Princeton, I think, professor who did a study talking about racial politics and how some politicians refuse to make openly racist remarks, but use certain code words. When they talk about crime, they talk about welfare, they talk about aliens. They're basically trying to appeal to a certain kind of voter, racist voter, who is going to love that kind of jargon and vote for this particular candidate. So there are key code words, especially this campaign, this election of 1994, that were used very, very often.
But what's sad, is that, as you know, a lot of the some major Latino groups came out right before the election and said they weren't going to endorse any candidate in the Senate race, for example. And because they called it a lose-lose situation. So that kind of racist campaigning is going to work because, for example, the Hispanic voters here in this case, apparently a lot of them just sat home.
Unfortunately, that's what tends to happen in our community. We don't register, we don't vote, and then we complain.
Exactly.
Yeah, and part of what Rosalvo was saying about how there were 15 to 25% of the Latino voters voted for Proposition 187 because there was that division between people who came here legally and the ones they're looking at people who come here illegally.
Yeah, there's bigotry even in our own community.
I think part of the problem is maybe we haven't, people or the groups haven't made it clear what something like Proposition 187 means for all immigrants, not just the illegal immigrants.
Well, the same goes for the English movement.
Right.
There was a lot of Latinos who didn't really quite understand what these people are trying to do by imposing English. It's not that you officialize English. We all recognize that English is the language of the country. But when they try to officialize English, what they're trying to do is eliminate all government documents in Spanish. And they don't want you to vote in Spanish. They don't want you to have any information or access to any information at the service agencies. And so they're trying to deny the elderly and the recent arrival the information that they would need because they haven't had time to learn English yet. People don't recognize that. Some Latinos vote for this. Before we have to go, and we're running out of time, what is your impression of what happened in New York with Pataki defeating Cuomo?
I was pretty shocked that an incumbent, I thought a very popular mayor, lost. I mean, I was actually stunned. Maybe I'm not that politically savvy.
No, I was too. I was shocked by it. But again, it's kind of the mood that's sweeping the country. People are able to zero in on fears that most people have and use it to their advantage. And you know, one thing, if we have to go, I just wanted to point out that I was looking at the Republicans' contract with America, and almost every single one of the things they want to do will hurt minorities. They want to cut back on school grants, makes it more difficult to get school loans. They want to pay for welfare reform by denying benefits to legal residents, which just is amazing to me. They want to make it, you know, they want to cut welfare benefits to any unwed mother under 26. I mean, it's just shocking to me that anyone could come in and say, well, we'll just like wipe out this whole
You cover
segment.
the State House and you cover Governor Whitman. If you were to give some advice in the half a minute that we have to New Yorkers who may see the same cutbacks that Whitman is implementing in New Jersey, implemented now by Pataki.
They can't just sit back and complain and whine and stuff. They should be knocking on the governor-elect's door, on all their representatives' doors, and just get involved in the process instead of just sitting back and waiting for good things to happen.
We have to go. Our time is up. I'm Miguel Perez, and I hope to see you soon right here on NJN, the New Jersey channel, in another edition of Images Imágenes. Hasta pronto.